Welcome to the deep dive. You sent us some really compelling stuff this time, looking into why getting your financial footing can feel so hard, like running in quicksand for so many of us.
Yeah, even when people feel like they're trying to do all the right things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Your sources suggest something pretty powerful. This idea that we're all subject to a kind of societal programming when it comes to money.
Mm-hmm.
And that this might be, well, a key reason why financial well-being feels so elusive.
That's a fascinating angle. The material you've shared really pushes this idea that our financial struggles aren't just, about individual choices or mistakes,
Right.
but about these almost invisible scripts that society seems to have written for us. It's about how different systems, big systems, shape our beliefs and behaviors around money.
Often in ways we don't even realize.
Precisely.
So our mission today is to really try and get under the hood of this programming.
Mm-hmm.
We understand how it works, where it comes from.
And maybe find some ways to break free.
Yes, exactly. Figure out some ways for you listening to maybe rewrite some of that code for yourself. Your sources pointed to a few big players here. The media we consume,
Uh-huh.
the education we receive, and those really deep-seated generational beliefs about money. Where should we start peeling back the layers?
Well, let's maybe start with the media. Your sources highlight just how much of our day is spent engaging with it.
Yeah, I saw that stat, over 5 hours for the average American.
That's right, over 5 hours. It's a huge window, really, for these financial messages to seep in, consciously or not.
It's like a constant drip feed, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a major theme that comes through in the material is how advertising just relentlessly links spending with feeling good.
Oh, absolutely. Constantly manufacturing these desires, these needs for things we might not actually need.
Think about those ads that promise, instant happiness or status if you just buy this latest gadget or that amazing experience.
And what's interesting there, and the sources touch on this, is how this constant emphasis on consumption subtly normalizes debt. Well, think about movies and TV shows. Characters often rack up debt, credit card debt especially, almost without a second thought.
Yeah, it's just portrayed as normal life.
Exactly. Almost like it's just a standard part of living. We rarely see realistic portrayals of, say, the actual stress of being in debt, or maybe more importantly,
The journey of actually building wealth steadily.
precisely that slow, steady climb. It makes you wonder how that shapes our perceptions of what's normal and, frankly, what's achievable.
It really does. And when wealth is shown on screen, the material points out it's often through these very specific and often, let's be honest, unrealistic scenarios.
Like lottery wins.
Or inheriting a fortune out of the blue.
Yeah.
Or maybe those like ruthless Gordon Gekko type figures.
Right. It's rarely the story of someone diligently saving, investing, maybe starting a small business over time. Can you even think of a mainstream show that really makes the nuts and bolts of wealth building for everyday folks seem compelling?
It's tough, isn't it? Not much comes immediately to mind.
And this brings up social media, too, which is a huge part of that 5 hours. The platforms are designed to keep us scrolling, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the algorithms, they often serve us up personalized content that's really geared towards spending.
You see influencers showing their latest hauls, targeted ads popping up constantly.
It creates this very tailored echo chamber, almost, that reinforces the urge to consume. Meanwhile, content focused on, say, saving strategies or long-term investing often gets much less visibility. It's just not as algorithmically juicy, maybe.
Okay, so it sounds like the media landscape in all its forms, ads, entertainment, social media, is a really powerful, though often subtle, force nudging us towards spending and maybe away from understanding the fundamentals of building lasting financial security.
That seems to be the argument presented in the sources, yeah.
Now let's switch gears a bit and look at our education system. The argument here, based on your sources, is pretty, well, eye-opening.
You mean the idea that its primary design wasn't necessarily to equip us with financial smarts?
Exactly that. The sources delve into the historical context, particularly the Industrial Revolution.
Right, suggesting the system was largely structured back then to create a compliant and skilled workforce. Basically, people trained to be good employees.
Yeah, and when you consider the sheer amount of time we invest in schooling, the material mentions upwards of 15,000 hours.
15,000 hours, it's a huge chunk of life.
It is. And when you contrast that with how little dedicated, practical financial education most of us actually receive, it's striking.
It really is. And what's fascinating when you look at the source material is the list of really crucial financial topics that are often just missing from standard curricula.
Like what specifically?
Well, we're talking about things like the practical steps to start and grow a business, entrepreneurship basics,
Okay.
the core principles of investing, and the incredible power of compound interest. I mean, understanding that early on can be a total game changer.
Absolutely.
Also, often absent are insights into tax strategies used by wealthier individuals, understanding how real estate can be a tool for building wealth, not just a place to live.
And the whole concept of creating multiple income streams, right? Not just relying on one paycheck.
Exactly. These are pretty fundamental to long-term financial well-being, yet they're often not systematically taught in most schools.
Instead, as the material points out, the emphasis is so heavily on securing that stable job, getting that regular paycheck.
Which, look, there's nothing wrong with having a stable job as a foundation.
Of course not. But the sources suggest that relying solely on this path can unintentionally lead to a kind of financial dependency.
Being reliant on a single employer, a single source of income.
Yeah. It seems the system, maybe unintentionally, prioritizes those job-specific skills over the broader financial intelligence needed for true independence.
Precisely. The focus tends to be on how to navigate the existing employment landscape, how to get a job, how to keep a job.
Rather than empowering individuals to understand the underlying mechanics of the financial world itself.
And how they might leverage those mechanics to their advantage. It's a different focus.
Okay, this leads us nicely into another really influential aspect highlighted in your sources, generational programming.
Ah, yes, the money stories we inherit.
This idea that we inherit these really deep-seated beliefs and attitudes about money, often starting from our earliest childhood experiences. It's almost like we're running on a financial operating system.
That was installed without us even being aware of it. That's a very insightful way to put it.
It feels like that sometimes.
The sources describe these early beliefs as a kind of financial blueprint that shapes our adult decisions. These are the often unspoken rules, the assumptions about money we absorb from family, community.
Just by osmosis, growing up.
Pretty much.
And the sources provide some really common examples of these, well, limiting beliefs that get passed down. Things like, money doesn't grow on trees.
Right, which immediately instills this feeling of scarcity, doesn't it? That money is inherently hard to come by.
Or the notion that rich people are greedy or unethical. That's a powerful one.
It really is. It can create a subconscious barrier to even wanting wealth, because who wants to be seen as greedy or unethical?
Then there's the classic, you have to work incredibly hard for every single dollar.
And look, hard work is important, no doubt. But that belief, taken to an extreme, can make us resistant to exploring more efficient or passive ways of generating income.
Because it doesn't feel earned in the same way.
Perhaps. And we also see phrases like, we're just not the kind of people who invest.
Oof, yeah. That can be deeply ingrained in certain families or communities.
Effectively shutting off a significant pathway to wealth accumulation right there. Or the seemingly logical statement, it takes money to make money.
Which sounds true on the surface.
But it can be misinterpreted to mean that you can't even begin building wealth without a substantial amount of capital already, which can be incredibly discouraging, especially for those starting with limited resources.
It's fascinating and maybe a little unsettling to realize how these seemingly harmless phrases can have such a profound impact on our actual financial behavior.
It really is.
The material gives the example of someone who deeply believes you have to work hard for money, might subconsciously just shy away from passive income opportunities, even if they're presented.
It's like their internal programming is telling them it's not real money or it's somehow cheating the system.
And that idea of associating wealth with negativity is so powerful. The sources suggest you might unknowingly sabotage your own financial progress just to maintain this identity of being a good or ethical person, as defined by those inherited beliefs.
Which brings us to the crucial question then. How do we begin to dismantle this programming, if it's so deep-seated?
Right. What's the way out?
Well, the sources really emphasize that the very first, and maybe the most important step, is simply becoming aware. Aware that this programming exists and recognizing the potential influence it's had on our own financial lives.
And that moment of recognition, the material suggests, is actually a huge step forward in itself.
Absolutely. It's like finally noticing the water you're swimming in, realizing it isn't just the natural state of things. There are other possibilities.
So once we have that awareness, that light bulb moment, what does the process of breaking free actually look like? according to the sources?
Well, the sources introduce this idea of deconditioning.
Deconditioning, okay.
It's described as a deliberate, systematic effort to identify those limiting beliefs we've been carrying around.
The money doesn't grow on trees kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Identify them and then actively work to replace them with more empowering and constructive ones.
Okay, but how? Is it just positive thinking?
It's crucial to understand, as the material stresses, that this isn't just about trying to think positively on the surface level. That can feel a bit like papering over cracks.
Right.
It's about really digging down and rewiring those deeply ingrained thought patterns that have been reinforced over years, almost like creating new neural pathways in your brain related to money and success.
Rewiring the operating system.
That's a good analogy for it.
And the sources even touch on a specific example of a system that claims to help with this, the Billionaire Brain Wave system. Now, just for clarity for everyone listening, it's important to understand that we're sharing this neutrally, as it's mentioned in the material you sent us. We're not endorsing it, just reporting on what the sources say.
Correct. The claim, as presented in the source material, is that this system uses specific sound frequency patterns.
Okay.
And these patterns supposedly target the subconscious mind with the goal of fostering new neural connections, essentially helping to build those new pathways associated with wealth creation and financial abundance.
So it's presented as one potential approach to breaking through those deeply rooted mental barriers that can hold us back financially.
Exactly. It's offered as an example of a method that tries to go beyond just traditional financial advice by specifically addressing that underlying subconscious programming we've been talking about.
Okay, so it sounds like we start by becoming aware, which is huge. Then we move into this process of actively deconditioning our minds, maybe even exploring tools or methods like the one mentioned that aim to influence our subconscious beliefs. But the sources also point to something maybe more fundamental, a shift in how we actually relate to money, right?
Yes, this transition from primarily being a consumer to adopting more of a creator mindset.
Consumer to creator. Tell me more about that shift.
Well, the material argues that true, lasting financial transformation requires this fundamental change in perspective. Instead of constantly focusing on what we can acquire, what we can buy, how we can afford this or that.
That's the consumer mentality.
That's the consumer mentality. The shift involves asking different questions. Questions like, how can I create value? How can I contribute something to the world that generates income and builds wealth?
It's like moving from constantly trying to get a bigger slice of the existing economic pie.
To actively figuring out how to bake more pies. That's a great way to put it.
And the sources outline some really practical outcomes that seem to flow naturally from making that shift.
They do. Suddenly, you start to see problems not just as frustrations, but as potential opportunities. Opportunities to create valuable solutions that people might pay for.
Okay, seeing opportunities instead of just problems.
You also become much more discerning, the sources suggest, about what constitutes a true asset, something that puts money in your pocket, versus a liability, something that takes money out.
That's a classic distinction, but maybe seen through a new lens here.
Exactly. The creator mindset naturally leads to thinking in terms of leverage.
Leverage, how so?
How can you amplify your efforts? How can you reach a wider audience or market without necessarily working proportionally harder? Thinking about systems, scalability.
Got it. Not just trading time for money directly.
Right. And you begin to view money differently too, not just as an end in itself, something to hoard or spend, but as a tool, a resource that can be strategically deployed to build more value, create more assets.
And crucially, you start to prioritize building systems that can generate income even when you're not actively working.
Those all-important passive income streams we mentioned earlier, the creator mindset naturally seeks those out.
So this journey of financial awakening, as your sources describe it, it really boils down to, first, recognizing the often invisible programming we've been subjected to.
Awareness first.
Then actively working to dismantle those limiting beliefs, the deconditioning part.
Rewiring the brain, essentially.
And finally, making this fundamental shift in our approach to money, moving from being primarily a receiver, a consumer,
to actively becoming a creator of value.
That's a very insightful distillation of the key takeaways from the material you sent.
And the material really emphasizes that while we didn't choose the initial financial narratives we were exposed to through media, school, family.
Right, that wasn't our choice.
We absolutely do have the agency, the power to choose a different path forward. Every single day presents us with opportunities to question those ingrained assumptions,
To pause before buying something, maybe.
or to consciously focus on creating value rather than just consuming, and to proactively take steps, however small, to build wealth on our own terms.
And the sources leave us with this really thought-provoking question, almost a challenge. What if everything you've been taught about money was designed to benefit someone else?
Oof, that's a powerful question to sit with, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Because truly exploring that possibility, even just entertaining it, that could be the very catalyst for a significant shift in your perspective. A genuine financial awakening, as the sources put it.
And it's important to note, as the sources highlight, this financial awakening isn't solely about personal gain, about just getting rich for its own sake.
It's framed as something bigger.
Yes, it's about unlocking the freedom and the resources to make your most meaningful contribution to the world, to have the agency, the choice, the power to shape the life and the impact you were truly meant to have.
So it connects personal finance to a broader sense of purpose.
That's the idea presented.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's take that powerful call to action directly from the material you shared. It's time to
Break free from financial programming.
recondition your mind for abundance.
Write your own financial story.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.